I never believed in near-death experiences. I always thought they were just fabrications, delusions of people seeking attention. But what happened to me, that was real. And it changed my life forever. My name is Stepan. I was born and raised in Guatemala, and until I turned 34, I was absolutely certain of who I was. I was always practical, independent, tough. From a young age, I learned that relying on others was a mistake. I grew up watching my mother suffer because my father abandoned us. She always said, "Men are no good," and those words became an absolute truth in my mind. At 16, I realized I wasn't attracted to boys. Girls interested me more. I had my first girlfriends, and over time, I fully embraced that as my identity. I never wanted a man to be part of my life, not out of hatred, but simply because I saw no need. If something broke in my house, I fixed it. If I needed to carry something heavy, I carried it myself. If a light bulb went out, I replaced it, and that was exactly what led me to my death. That night, I was home alone as usual. The light bulb on my porch burned out, and without hesitation, I grabbed a ladder and climbed up to replace it. It wasn't anything difficult. I had done it countless times before. But that day, something happened. The moment I stretched my arm to screw in the new bulb, I felt a slight imbalance. My foot slipped, and then everything became a blur. The last thing I remember was the impact. A sharp pain, a loud ringing in my ears, and then silence. My neighbor Carlos heard the noise and rushed to my house. He found me unconscious, unresponsive, and immediately took me to the hospital. They told me later that I was still alive when I arrived. But shortly after being admitted, my heart stopped. For exactly 8 minutes, I was clinically dead. And what happened during those 8 minutes was something my mind could never have imagined, something that shattered everything I believed in. I left my body. I saw the hospital. I saw the doctors desperately trying to revive me, but I wasn't there anymore. At first, I didn't realize I was dead. Everything felt like a strange dream. Just moments before, I had felt the pain of the fall, the impact against the floor, the distant sound of my neighbor shouting my name. And then, absolute silence. Suddenly, I was still there, in the exact same place where I had fallen. But something was different. There was a lightness to me that I had never felt before, something impossible to describe. There was no pain, no weight, no fear. I instinctively stood up without any effort. But when I looked down, my body was still lying there. The sight hit me like a punch to the stomach. I was lying on the porch floor, motionless, pale, my eyes half open, lifeless. My first reaction was to scream for help. But my voice wouldn't come out. In fact, I wasn't even breathing. Panic surged through me. This couldn't be happening. It was impossible. I tried to touch my own arm, but my fingers went straight through it, like I was made of mist. Terror gripped me. What was happening to me? Then, I heard footsteps rushing toward me. Moments later, my neighbor Carlos appeared. I saw his face change the instant he found my body. He knelt beside me, shook my shoulders, called my name. "Stepan, can you hear me? Stepan." I was right there. But he couldn't see me. I ran through the house, trying to process everything, trying to make sense of it. And that's when I noticed something even more terrifying. I wasn't walking. I was floating. There was no friction, no weight, no limits. It was as if gravity no longer applied to me. And then, without warning, I was pulled upward. My house disappeared. Everything around me turned to darkness. But it wasn't ordinary darkness. It wasn't like closing your eyes. It was a void, absolute emptiness. No sound, no color, no form. And then, I felt something I had never experienced before. A loneliness that went beyond human sorrow. And then, the voices. At first, they were whispers. Then, they became distant echoes. Until finally, they turned into clear words. And what terrified me the most, they were talking about me. She never believed. She always rejected the truth. She thought she knew everything. Cold dread crawled down my spine. Who was saying these things? Where was I? Instinct told me to run. But I had nowhere to go. I was drifting in a place without direction. And then, I saw it. Far below me, a scene began to take shape, like I was looking through an invisible window. It was the hospital. I saw my own body being rushed down the corridors, surrounded by doctors and nurses. I saw a doctor pressing her fingers against my forehead, trying to revive me. I saw electrodes being placed on my chest, the frantic movements of the medical team. I saw one of the doctors glance at the clock. And then, I heard the words that sent ice through my soul. Time of death, 11:47 p.m. I was dead. Those words crashed over me like a crushing weight. This was the end of everything. And then, as if something had grabbed me, I was ripped away from the scene, thrown back into the darkness. The sensation was worse than anything I had ever experienced. It was like falling forever and never hitting the ground. Like screaming, but no one could hear you. And then, a light. At first, it was a small point in the distance. But as it drew closer, something inside me changed. The fear began to fade. It was as if that light had the power to pull the darkness away from me. My heart, if I still had one, tightened. Somehow I knew. That wasn't just a light. It was someone. And as it finally came into focus, my world changed forever. The light grew brighter. But it wasn't like looking at the sun. It wasn't a harsh glare that hurt my eyes. It was alive. I could feel it. Like warmth that didn't burn. Like an embrace that wrapped around every part of my being. And then, he appeared. At first, it was just a silhouette. But as he came closer, I knew. No doubt. No hesitation. It was Jesus. My chest, if I even had one, tightened. A wave of emotions surged through me. Fear, awe, shame, peace, all at the same time. I wanted to speak, but I couldn't. He looked at me, and in that instant, I knew that he knew. Not just my name, not just my past, everything. He knew every thought I had ever had. He knew every choice I had ever made. He knew my fears, my pain, my hidden wounds. He knew about the nights I cried alone. He knew about the anger I carried in my heart. He knew how much I had rejected the idea of him. And yet, he still loved me. Jesus reached out his hand. And the moment he did, everything changed. The darkness vanished. In an instant, I was no longer in the void. I was somewhere else. A place that words cannot describe. A place so beautiful, so radiant, so perfect. It took my breath away. But it wasn't just the beauty of it. It wasn't like looking at a stunning landscape or a glowing city of lights. It was something holy, something that made me want to fall to my knees and weep. Because for the first time in my life, I felt like I was exactly where I was always meant to be. The peace in that place was beyond anything I had ever known. I saw colors that don't exist on Earth. I heard sounds that weren't music, yet they touched my soul. Even the very air felt like it was made of love, of grace, of something pure and untouchable. Jesus began to walk, and I followed. All around us, heavenly beings appeared. I don't know if they were angels, but their presence filled me with reverence. Some of them sang. Others simply worshipped in a way that I couldn't fully understand. But even though everything around me was perfect, something inside me felt heavy. Because deep down I knew I didn't belong there, no matter how beautiful this place was. Something inside me told me that I couldn't stay, like I was carrying a weight that couldn't enter this world. Jesus stopped and looked at me, and in that moment, I realized there was something I still didn't know, something that would change everything. And Jesus, with a voice that carried the sound of eternity, was about to reveal it to me. Jesus stood before me, looking into my eyes, but his gaze wasn't filled with judgment. It wasn't filled with condemnation. It was love, a love so deep that I couldn't bear its weight. My legs, if I even had them, gave out. I collapsed to my knees. In that instant, a storm of emotions consumed me. Shame, fear, the certainty that I didn't deserve to be there. But Jesus didn't turn away. He just smiled. And then, without him even moving his lips, Visions began to appear all around me. I was watching my own life unfold, but from a perspective I had never seen before. I saw my childhood. I saw my mother, broken by the pain of abandonment. I saw her repeating the words that shaped my entire worldview. Men are no good. I saw my younger self, absorbing that belief. I saw the teenager who pushed away everything that reminded her of masculinity. The girl who built walls around her heart, who swore she would never depend on anyone. And then, I saw something I had never noticed before. In the middle of all the pain, in the middle of all the rejection, there were good men around us. I saw the neighbor who always helped my mother fix things around the house. I saw my mother's boss, who let her leave early when I was sick. I saw the teacher who encouraged me, telling me I was too smart to give up. I saw the waiter at the restaurant, who always treated us with kindness. And my heart sank. Why had I never seen this before? I had spent my whole life believing that men were the enemy. But the truth was right in front of me. God had always placed good people in my path, but I refused to see them. A lump formed in my throat. But the greatest revelation was still to come. Jesus extended his hand, and the vision changed. This time, I saw my father. He was older than I remembered, sitting alone, staring into nothing. And then, I saw him crying with regret. My mind screamed, "No, he left us. He doesn't deserve my forgiveness." But my heart already knew the truth. I had spent my whole life carrying hatred, carrying pain, carrying rejection. But none of that had healed my mother. None of that had changed my past. None of that had made me happy. The hatred I held toward him didn't hurt him. It hurt me. And then Jesus spoke. His voice wasn't like any sound on earth. It was something that shattered every wall I had ever built. "Forgive, Stepan." I trembled. My first instinct was to say no, to say that I couldn't. But before I could speak, he continued, "You have been carrying a burden that you don't need to carry. I have known you since you were in your mother's womb. I know your pain, your struggles, your fears. But now, it is time to let go. Do you want to be free? Then forgive." Tears streamed down my face. Forgive? After everything? But then, Jesus stepped closer, and everything changed. The pain I felt, the resentment I had carried for years, the anger I had let define me, it all disappeared. In his presence, the wounds I thought would never heal melted away. Jesus showed me something I had never admitted before. I had not rejected men because I loved women. I had rejected men because I was afraid of them. It was self-protection, a way to control my life. If I never let a man near me, then I would never be hurt like my mother had been. It was a shock. For so many years, I believed my identity was set in stone. But now, everything made sense. It wasn't about desire. It was about fear. Jesus looked at me again, and what he said next burned into my soul. "I created you with a purpose. Everything I made has an order, a balance, a design. Man and woman were created to complete each other, to support one another, to build families. That is my plan." My mind raced. But God is so loving that he gave us free will. Jesus knelt before me. He held my hands. For the first time, I truly felt his touch. It was peace. It was love. It was life. And then, he said something that made my heart stop. "Now, Stepan, you must choose." My heart raced. I had to choose? Could I just stay there in that peace and that love, away from all the confusion? Jesus' light surrounded me, and for the first time in my life, I felt whole. But he was giving me a choice. I could continue on the path I had always walked, or I could trust him. The light around him pulsed, as if heaven itself was waiting for my answer. I closed my eyes. I took a deep breath, and when I looked back at him, there was only one thing I wanted to say. I choose to live in Christ. In that instant, I felt something being torn from me, as if chains I never even knew I was carrying shattered, as if a weight I had carried my entire life vanished. And for the first time ever, I felt real peace. But it wasn't over yet. Jesus smiled, and then he said, "Then go back. There is something you still need to do." Before I could even ask him what he meant, darkness surrounded me again. The brightness of heaven disappeared. And then, I opened my eyes. I was back in the hospital. The first thing I felt was pain. It was like being ripped away from a world with no suffering and thrown back into a broken body. My chest burned. My head pounded. And the sound of machines beeping filled the room. My eyes weren't adjusted to the light yet. Everything was blurry. And then, as I tried to breathe, I realized something. I was alive. I was back in my body. I was given another chance. The hospital room felt so small compared to where I had just been. I could feel the weight of the sheets on my body, the smell of disinfectant in the air, the sticky electrodes on my chest. And then I heard voices. At first, they were distant. But then one voice became clear. She's back. My God, she's back. A nurse ran out of the room, calling for the doctors. The sound of footsteps rushing down the hall echoed around me. I tried to speak, but my throat was so dry. It felt like I hadn't talked in days. And then, the weight of reality hit me. I had died. And more than that, I had seen Jesus. The memory flooded into my mind. The brightness of his presence. The sound of his voice. The truth he had revealed to me. It was so vivid. So real. But how could I ever explain this to anyone? The doctor came rushing in. He checked my vitals, staring at me like he was seeing a miracle. Stephanie, you gave us quite a scare. You were dead for 8 minutes. 8 minutes. It had felt like an eternity. But deep down, I knew something inside of me had changed forever. The next few days were a blur. My mother was called to the hospital. The moment she saw me awake, she collapsed into tears. I tried to tell her what had happened, but the words wouldn't come out. How could I explain that Jesus had shown me everything I had refused to see? That the hatred I had carried for so many years had only been destroying me? That my views of myself had been built on fear, not love? I tried, but nobody seemed to understand. Sweetheart, you hit your head. It could be the trauma. You were unconscious. Your brain must have created these images. It was just a dream. But I knew. It wasn't a dream. It was real. And the more I tried to stay silent, the more it burned inside me. I had to tell the world what Jesus had shown me. But would anyone believe me? The truth was, I was still trying to understand it myself. Who was I now? It wasn't until I was discharged from the hospital that I truly realized my life would never be the same again. I had to make a decision. Would I hide this truth forever? Or would I have the courage to speak it? I was not the same person anymore. After that experience, nothing inside me felt like it fit the way it used to. I looked at myself in the mirror and saw a familiar face, but I knew that deep inside, everything had changed. But change isn't easy. For the first few days, I tried to go back to my old routine. I woke up, went to work, talked to my friends. I pretended that nothing had happened. But no matter how hard I tried, something inside me was screaming. I couldn't look at life the same way anymore. The conversations that used to entertain me now felt empty. The opinions I once defended so passionately now seemed like they belonged to someone else. And the worst part? The fear of telling people what I had experienced. How could I possibly explain that I had died, gone to heaven, seen Jesus, and returned transformed? How could I tell them that he had shown me truths I had spent my whole life denying? That he had given me a choice, and I had chosen to live for him? For a while, I tried to keep it all inside. But the more I stayed silent, the more I felt like I was suffocating. It was like trying to hold fire inside my chest. Until one night, as I was trying to fall asleep, Jesus' words echoed in my mind. Do you want to be free? Then forgive. That was when I finally understood. My transformation wouldn't begin until I obeyed what he had asked of me. I had to forgive my father, and that terrified me. For years, I had convinced myself that he didn't deserve my forgiveness. But what if forgiveness wasn't about who deserves it? What if forgiveness was about setting myself free? The next morning, I picked up the phone. My hands were shaking. My heart was pounding. But when I heard my father's voice on the other end of the line, something inside me broke. There was silence when I told him, I forgive you. And then I heard a sound I never expected. A choked sob. "Forgive me, daughter. Please forgive me." At that moment, I knew. God's love had not only set me free, it was also setting him free. That was the first step in my new journey. Since then, my life has been a path of learning and surrender. I began to study the Bible, to seek and understand more about the God who gave me a second chance. The truth had always been there, but I never wanted to see it. And now I couldn't deny it anymore. I started to step away from everything that had once defined my identity, because I realized that my true identity had always been in Christ. Today, I know that God has a purpose for each one of us. He created us with love, gave us a plan, a mission, and the freedom to choose. And I chose Jesus. Before I end, I want to share with you the verse that marked my transformation. "Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." John 8 verse 32. If this story touched your heart, share it, leave a comment. And if you're not yet part of this community, subscribe now for more stories that can change your life. May God bless you.